we should actually, there it is. If you can hit the got it, we will record this and our members can actually view this at a later date on the back end of the 1776 Syndicate site. So that lives indefinitely back there. And so your message will be going out not just tonight, but to all the people who join us if they come on late or if they're watching us afterward. So that being said, we do want to leave some time for question and answer afterward. And so I will do a brief background on you. Dr. Berry, you've got some incredible accolades and accomplishments. And I'm just going to skim some of the highlights, but I want you to talk to us a little bit too about what's been important to you about what you've done in your life. Besides degrees, which you're very well credentialed, I will say, BS in engineering from Caltech, your master's in physics from Dartmouth, and a PhD in theoretical physics from University of Nevada, just to get us started, right? So
yeah, and I'll add that with all that, I can't make my video come up.
Well, you know what? If that's the worst of our worries, we do have audio, so we've always got that plan B. And maybe we'll come back. We'll ask you on again, Dr. Berry, if you would, if you can come get to the bottom of that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We'll have you back because there is so much content that you have to offer that I know we can't get it all done in one night anyway. So we always ask our guests afterwards if we can call them back, and we've not had anyone refuse us. So I think that'll be a good thing. Dr. Berry, there are several things, and I'll have you talk a little bit more about your background because it's just amazing to me what you've accomplished. And I mentioned to you after a talk that you had given, a presentation you'd given earlier in the year, I had my own epiphany. Number one, I had my own ideas on the whole man-made climate change that I think that was giving man a whole lot more credit, being very prideful. I don't think we had that kind of power to change the climate. And my revelation, I shared this with you, was I was on a flight in a year that we had severe forest fires in California, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Montana. And I was on a plane flight flying over those areas and looking down from the 30,000 foot level. You know, when you're down in the valley and in the smoke, it seems like, oh, this is terrible, it's incredible. But when you're up above that, there are little blips, you know, on our geography. Yeah. And that was a revelation to me that, you know, when we're on the ground, we look at things and think they're so bad, but when we get up above it, we're not as big and as important as we think we are. And that kind of was my epiphany. And that was well over a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago. And so when I've started reading this stuff, I've read it with a very skeptical mind, you know, what we get in the press and all that kind of stuff. But you're on the research end of that. And one of the things I've asked you to talk about tonight is the silencing of the scientific component that goes against that narrative. So if you would please give us a little bit more of your background, what you think is relevant for us, because nobody wants to blow their own horn, but you've got a horn that deserves to be blown. So set us up with that credibility factor. And I know the quick go-to that we want people who are involved in government, people who want to get involved in government, people who want people elected that are making sound decisions. What is it that they need to know about this global warming narrative? That I'll use that word, okay?
Sure.
It's certainly not science. What is it they need to know to be armed to counter this? And I'm going to turn the floor over to you from there. Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, forgetting about what I've done. I mean, I have worked in the government. I worked for the National Science Foundation as a program manager for 4 years. And that I found out what the government's like in Washington, right? They think of us typically, the administrators, as ants out there, and they're the chiefs. And I couldn't believe just the attitude. And this was many years ago, so it's there. But as a part of what I did, I was the program manager for what's called the Metromex program, which was in St. Louis. And that was the first experiment that showed how a metropolitan area modifies its climate. And it does. I mean, that's as we all know at this point, cities are warm and they have more moisture and they stop the wind flow and they do change the climate that's in there. And this was a massive project in those days. And that was the first one to actually prove it. And I just happened to be the program manager of that particular thing. Then, so that's part of what's relevant today. And then going back just a little ways, before that, I was at the Desert Research Institute because I got my PhD at the University of Nevada. And I guess the outstanding thing there was my particular PhD thesis. It was theoretical. And I was given the main problem. How can rain form within 30 minutes in a warm cloud, meaning no ice formation? And this is the majority of the clouds over the ocean. So it's the main cloud. And nobody could figure it out. We knew they started as very small drops, about the size of cigarette smoke floating around. And how do they end up turning into raindrops? And they do it by just happening to hit each other and they coalesce. And so you have little tiny things coalesce into something a little bit bigger, and then something a little bit bigger. And what happens after that? So the question was, how do you calculate that? And so I figured out how to calculate that. And so I showed that, using probability and mathematics, how in fact raindrops can form within 20 minutes in that kind of cloud. That was such a major breakthrough at that point that the director of the Desert Research Institute, he says, I put Desert Research Institute on the map just with my thesis. And so I became kind of known all over the world just for that, making that particular breakthrough. I've been a consultant for the Department of Defense on many things. I mean, basically all over the world. I guess because of what I did in my PhD thesis, it was a lot relevant to many of the projects that they were doing in weather modification. And I was even over in the Philippines once with them. I was the only civilian consultant. And we were teaching B-52 pilots, but in C-130s, because we can't all fit in a B-52, how you can go and take a cloud in that area in the Philippines, a warm, tight cloud, and gradually modify it until it's a major storm cloud with rain just pouring out of it. And so we could do this consistently. I was part of that experiment. They used it to wash out the Ho Chi Minh Trail a long time ago, right? So it used to be a top secret program. Anyway, on and on. So I've been involved one way or another in this whole, what we call climate today. I mean, it started by calling it weather, but now it's climate. And it's just a matter of how you perceive it, the climate being a long-term average of weather events, but it's all the same physics. I would say you can approach this thing that I call it a total fraud. The whole idea that our carbon dioxide is causing all these major weather changes. It can't be done. It can't happen when we go into the details. And there's all kind of general things that the public can see. You just say, well, hey, climate's been changing for a long time, and it's changing now, and it's no different than in the past. Now, in some people's memory, however, because we read people writing letters in the newspapers, they think, wow, it used to always be totally consistent, and now it's changing, and it's all our fault. This is a major thing that's going on that is fooling people. I'll start with an example of something I wrote about. You may have read it, where recently a reporter, a news writer for the Associated Press, he wrote a certain thing. He's quoting predictions from a IPCC report back in 2012, where they said they were predicting all this kind of bad stuff would happen. And he brought in a college professor to talk to as well. And they were both saying, well, all this bad stuff proves that all that prediction was right, which proves all their theory was right, which proves we indeed cause weather, all this weather modification. And that's just logically false. A true prediction does not mean your theory is correct. Okay, I mean, You can have a totally wrong theory. You can, whatever you can dream up and you predict something, that doesn't mean that you have some real good theory. It doesn't work that way. We can't, these are fundamentals now. I mean, they're simple enough to be taught in high school. Fundamentals. We cannot prove a theory is true, but we can prove a theory is false. How do we test a theory? We take a theory, we make a prediction. If the prediction is true, well, it might be true. The theory might be true, but it's not. That doesn't mean it is. We can go on and make 1,000 good predictions and come up with one prediction that's wrong. What does that mean? That means the theory is wrong. It takes one contradiction, prove the theory is wrong. Science progresses by proving theories are wrong. Go back to the light bulb, right? Inventing the light bulb. You can try anything. You can try 100 different ways. And all you're doing is saying, here's my theory. If I try this, I think it will turn on the light. And it fails, and it fails, and it fails, right? So you got to go through a lot of tests. But each time that it fails, what that means you've proved that idea or that theory is wrong. And that means that information that led you to make that theory, you can now take, it's like a haystack, right? You can remove that much of the hay. The needle or the truth is somewhere still in the haystack. But as we go through science, and it applies certainly to this problem in climate change, we come with the theories, we test it, and if it makes a mistake, if it's a wrong prediction, science says we've got to get rid of it. Now, that doesn't always happen. If politics is involved, if the United Nations and the IPCC is involved, even if the Democrats are involved, we can prove a theory is wrong and they'll just ignore it. They'll just go on pounding their drum, which they do, because they don't want to face the music that says, hey, there's something wrong with what they're claiming. I'll slow down here. I might be getting over people's heads, so I'll give you time to respond before I keep going at this kind of a thing.
I think we're right on track. So
Okay.
you go right on ahead. I think we're good, but you're causing me to write notes down because I have questions later, but I'll let you keep going with what's going on.
All right.
And by the way, I'm captivated, so don't slow down, keep going.
All right.
Thanks, Jim.
So in the climate area, the climate change, all the claims of climate change that depend upon an effect, which is probably 99% of what the public hears and reads. Something happened, a forest fire, as you started with earlier,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, a hurricane, a tornado, okay? That's an effect. And the standard thing in climate is to emphasize to people that, wow, that effect means our carbon dioxide must really be causing something bad, right? And people believe that, unfortunately. The fact is, effects do not prove their cause. An effect can never prove its cause. Let's say your car doesn't start. Why? Is that a gas? Spark plugs don't work. Something else isn't working. Something's clogged. Whatever it is, okay? There could be a lot of things that cause a car not to start. So just the fact that it doesn't start doesn't tell us why. Medical, okay? You get a headache or a stomach ache or something. As a common person, not being an MD, we say, something's causing this. What is it? The reason then that some of us at times then may go to a doctor to figure this out if it's really hurting, is because the doctor is trained to figure out the cause of certain effects. Okay.
Right.
They know what to look for. I mean, that's a profession, right? And in the same way, just the effect of a headache or a stomach ache doesn't automatically tell you what the cause is. Likewise, an effect of a hurricane or a tornado or something new in the weather doesn't tell you what the cause is. Now, they say that it's our carbon dioxide, but they have no proof that it is our carbon dioxide. In fact, there's no real logic that links our carbon dioxide emissions with a weather event. I've turned this into 3 steps because they make the most sense and I can explain this to the public easy. And that is, there are basically 3 ideas or theories that the United Nations, IPCC, and climate alarmists are assuming are true. Number 1, they assume that human carbon dioxide causes all the increase in atmospheric CO2. Now, a lot of people, even a lot of scientists, really believe that. And I'll go into that later and show you why that is, it can't even happen, right?
Right.
But it's a solid belief today that our carbon dioxide causes all the increase. In other words, way back, according to the IPCC, a few hundred years ago, was 280 parts per million, and now it's up around 415 parts per million. It increased. We know that it increased, okay? But was it caused by our carbon dioxide? There is no data that proves it is. It's purely an assumption. The second thing, assumption, that an increase in carbon dioxide causes global warming. That's questionable. Yes, there are papers that can say, well, okay, a certain amount of carbon dioxide increase will increase the global temperature a little bit, a lot less than the IPCC says it is. But what that is omitting when people say that is they're omitting the real atmosphere. There are changes in humidity and water vapor is a greenhouse gas. There are changes in clouds, and just a small change, like a 1% change in cloud cover over the Earth, will change the temperature of the Earth more than all the increase in carbon dioxide. So the idea of clouds, because the clouds reflect sunlight, okay? And so the clouds, and these are predominantly ocean type clouds. So if you're flying over ocean type clouds, you may be in nice clear air, you'll look down and see nice shiny clouds, big all over the place, right? The shiny ones are reflecting sunlight. And that means that's energy that's not hitting the surface of the Earth, and so it won't be heating the Earth. So clouds are very important. So the whole idea of this theory 2 of carbon dioxide, say, causing global warming, if we remove all the other things that can happen and all by itself a little bit, but it's the other things that really matter. And one of the things, by the way, in that is there's a good research going on that says the cosmic rays have a lot of effect on how much cloud cover we have. The cosmic rays affect the little tiny nuclei that causes the little tiny smoke-sized particles that my PhD thesis was about, of all things. And if we have a whole lot of the little particles, it takes much longer for the rain to form, which means the clouds last longer, which means it's more reflected sunlight. And so that's perhaps the biggest effect there as feedback. And the other piece is just the data itself from I-scores shows that changes in temperature precede changes in carbon dioxide level. So a temperature change will eventually change the carbon if it goes up. We're a few hundred years out of the Little Ice Age. It's been warming. Okay, carbon dioxide's going up. That is the likely cause of our whole natural carbon dioxide increase is in fact, we're warming out of the Little Ice Age. Right? So, but the data shows that historically, going back thousands of years, it's always a temperature change first and then the carbon dioxide. So anyway, that's theory number 2. Finally, the number 3 is that the global warming itself causes dangerous climate change. That's more complex meteorology, but basically the theories that are in there, they don't work either. And there's good people, that's not my major piece in this whole research, but there's very good people that show, wow, the warming doesn't really add any of this dangerous climate change. So that's another one. So all 3 theories are wrong. But all we have to do is prove one of the theories is wrong. And then their whole climate change falls apart. In other words, they have to tack 1, 2, and 3. They have to somehow justify all 3. We can show they're wrong by just saying one is wrong. And my specialty was in that part 1. So, and that's a digression, which I can get into after we do all the generalities, if you wish. But so summarizing what I said, everything we hear on this climate change from the news media, from virtually everybody telling us, they all focus on events and they claim, therefore, we're causing it. That is the wrong approach. It's not science, it's illogical. Events do not prove their cause. Therefore, how do we find what the cause is? Now we're back just to pure physics, which can identify causes, just like medicine can identify a cause of a headache, right? In physics, we can identify causes of how did the carbon dioxide increase to begin with? It has nothing to do with events. It just has to do with how you step through the process properly. I'll pause again for a few minutes to see where you want to go here.
Well, I will say this first. It's what do you think the easiest target would be to show the fallacy in the thinking for the common man? I mean, you've got 3 points here, and all 3 of them, it seems like would be easy enough to refute. So what would it take to get that message to resonate?
I mentioned a little bit about the theory 2, about does the CO2 increase cause global warming? And I mentioned just the historical record that we can point out. You know, if we were looking at graphs going back a few 100,000 years, we would see places where the temperature and carbon dioxide goes up and down. In every case, the temperature comes before the change in the carbon dioxide. And as we know, the cause comes before the effect. So that, without it getting too complicated, is a pretty good way just to say that theory is going to be wrong. Okay.
Right.
Now, theory 1. That is my specialty. And I think it's pretty easy to show people why our carbon dioxide is not causing all the increase and has not caused all the increase, okay? And this is sort of an interesting thing because I think it was about, 2016, that someone from the National Academy of Sciences, we kind of got in a little discussion on Twitter about this whole thing, kind of carbon dioxide caused the increase. And I was saying no at that point, and I had simplistic reasons at that point. I hadn't gone into it that thoroughly. So I asked the fellow if he'd come on my website and just present exactly what his reasons were. And he did. And I looked at him, and we had a little debate and all that. And that got me to thinking even more, because I looked at his logic and it was wrong.
Mhm.
But at that time, I didn't have the knowledge that I needed to respond really accurately, right? But it got me on that process. As of today, I mean, I have it solid. Okay, I have 2 published papers on that. My last one last December. It totally proves that there's no way that humans caused all that increase. That humans caused a little bit, but nature caused most of the carbon dioxide increase. Okay. Now, how do we get at that in a nice, simple way? There's a few ways to get at it. Okay. One way, imagine, because I can't show you on the screen, but imagine that you've got a bar graph and it starts at 0 and goes up to 450. And this represents parts per million. We start with a bar that says we're back in 1750. And according to the United Nations, and at this point, there's no use arguing with this, let's just assume that they're correct, is 280. And then as of today, we've added 140 to that. Okay, interesting, it's about 50% increase. Okay.
Mhm.
The next thing the IPC says is that 140 is all human caused. And what I did is I took the actual IPCC data, which is in their reports, and with some not very complicated calculations, I mean, not high-end physics, I could show that their own data says that as of 2020, that the human cause is only 35 out of that, meaning nature was 105. Now, the whole idea that nature is anything blows the alarmists apart. And the scientists that try to argue with me on that, they're totally upset because they won't accept anything. They've got to be all human caused, but it won't happen. Okay, why does it come out like 35? That's not too hard to explain. Imagine that you have, say, a bucket with a hole in the bottom. And you have a hose, you're pouring in some water. And as we've experimented, we've done a little bit of that ourselves, or you can think of a bathtub. The higher the level, the faster it goes out the hole in the bottom, right? There's essentially more water pressure, right? Now, that means that at some point you can adjust the inflow there carefully until the inflow keeps a certain level and the outflow equals the inflow. Okay, there's a place where you can set that. Nature is doing that. Okay, let's assume that part is nature. That, in other words, the natural level of 280 doesn't just sit there. Carbon dioxide is flowing into the atmosphere and out of the atmosphere quite rapidly, actually. And as it flows through, okay, the inflow essentially says here's a certain level, and the outflow is faster if the inflow is faster. Think of it like a lake, in fact. Now, we have Flathead Lake near where I live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the river's coming into Flathead Lake. And let's pretend the dam is simple, none of this generators and the water's going through the dam. So it's just going over the dam, right?
Right.
The inflow will set a level that's just enough above the dam until the outflow equals the inflow, and then the water level stays exactly the same as long as the inflow is constant, right?
Right.
So that's what's happening in the atmosphere. There's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but its level depends on the inflow, and the inflow will just change the level until the outflow equals the inflow. That's the 280 to begin with. Now, the IPCC and the other scientists don't even recognize that simple thing. I mean, this is basic high school physics. Okay. So it's just like the bucket. You know, to have the water sitting at above the bottom of the bucket, you realize, yeah, there's got to be some inflow and the stuff to take care of the outflow. And so the first thing is, if I were teaching a class, I would run through this thing about the flow sets the level. And we think of flows all the time. Now we ask, what happens when we add human inflow? Even the IPC says the human inflow is about 5% of the total, and nature's 95% of the total. Okay. So we got their data. If they said humans were twice the nature, okay, well, that'd be a different story. It's only 5%. Now, go back to our bucket thing. We say, all right, we've got water flowing in, and we're going to pour, say, some milk in, okay, to separator here on the other end. And 5%, it'll be 5% more coming in just from the milk. What is that going to do to the water level? Milk being mostly water. So it'll increase it a little bit. It'll be just as if we took the natural part in the hose and turned it 5% greater, right?
Right.
Which would raise it just a little bit. But the 5%, if it comes to equilibrium and it's mixed up, you can stir it up in the place. And then you ask, what is the percent of the milk in that tub if there's 5% flowing in of milk and 95% coming in as water? Certainly to the first approximation, you'd say, hey, it's 5%, right? It's not 50%. Nothing could do that. So it's 5%. Now, that means that, okay, humans could add 5% to that, say the 280, and 10% is 20. That's about 14 ppm. So with that first little thing, we say, okay, the human stuff could add, according to IPCC, that about 14 parts per million, not 140, as they claim. How do they come up with 140, right? Now, I got 35 in my paper, but that was a full calculation, taking into account where everything goes, flows through the surface ocean, deep ocean, land, and all that, right? So there's a full flow back and everything through the whole carbon cycle. That raised it to 35 in my calculations, but I'm using all the IPCC data. So it can't go more than that. There's no way. Now, you know what? Even the IPCC scientists realize that that's bad. They can't justify it. So what do? Now they tell you, well, the human carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere much longer than the natural carbon dioxide, and that's what's causing our big problem. I happen to be, I think, the first guy that published a paper that said, hey, human and natural carbon dioxide molecules, CO2, are identical. You can't tell them. Grab one out of the air and find it. The CO2, where did it come from? You can't tell. They're going to behave exactly the same. Okay. You can't put CO2 of exactly the same kind and claim that's going to last much longer than the other CO2 that came from nature. That's like, you know, just observational physics, and that blows their whole thing apart. Yet they're getting away with it today. You can find numerous papers, you know, on the internet and all that, and they use this excuse. Well, human stuff is staying much longer than the natural, and that's what's causing all this increase. No, it won't happen that way. So I'm just going through a few of the little things that are just simple logic where you can say, hey, there's something wrong with that claim that we're causing all the carbon dioxide increase. Now I'll pause again for a minute.
Well, Dr. Berry, I just in the interest of time, because I want to deal with the political ramifications of this, you've given us a real condensed version of that. Your book, the book link that we have for Climate Miracle, by the way, is on our website. So I encourage anybody who's listening to this, get the book and read the book. It's not like reading a detailed scientific paper. It is easy for a layperson to understand. I can say I've read it and it made sense to me, and I'm not a scientist, but the logic flows and follows. The other thing I want to mention real quick is that your paper was in fact peer reviewed. A lot of things people publish out there, they say, well, they'll try and debunk it because it wasn't peer reviewed. And I want to, I think it's very important people know from a scientific standpoint, your paper in fact was peer reviewed. And that's
it's been very peer reviewed. In fact, it got peer reviewed twice. In the first case, I sent it to a journal called Climate in Switzerland. They peer reviewed it. They said, okay, we approved it. They're going to do it. They sent me a little thing I could put on my website that says it's going to be published. And then a retired professor from the University of Montana saw it because he's looking at my website all the time. And he wrote to this climate journal. He had told me later that he did it. So I'm not making things up. He wrote to them and said, hey, Ed Berry's made all these mistakes in there. He says, I'm from the university. He's not from the university. So he scared him enough that Climate then told me, oh, they can't publish it. They changed their mind. But the point was they peer reviewed it. So I went to another journal. They peer reviewed it. And it passed, and it's peer reviewed by some very good people. So,
yeah. What was the second journal, Dr. Berry?
Science of Climate Change.
Ah, very good. Okay.
It's in Norway, and it's a group of very good people.
Okay, very good. So if we can segue for a minute here, I do want to ask you about, again, the silencing. What intrigues me most is you're a credentialed, reputable scientist with no agenda other than science and educating people about science. So
that's exactly right.
So what is the angle, do you think? And what must we do to combat people trying to debunk science for political gain or power gain? Because it can only be one of those two things, a political gain, power gain. And I understand there's a financial gain here for alternative energy. And I want you to speak to that too, because I'm not opposed to alternative energy. I just don't want to be scared into it. Right. I'm all for exploration and new ideas and new things, but I'm not going to be intimidated and scared and forced. So if you can address that a little bit.
Indeed, the way that the alarmists, I'll call them, have sold their claims is by scaring people. And they scare the little kids as well, right? So it's sold by fear, and it is well known psychologically that if you want someone to believe something, you can do it a little better if you scare them. And maybe the witch doctors of old kind of figured that out a long time ago, right? Figure out they want a little more power in their tribe, and you scare the people with something that's going to tell them something bad will happen if they do whatever. That a little bit of fear, if people can't figure it out for themselves, the fear kind of psychologically makes people go along with whatever they're being told. So that does exist. You can even see it in the media and a lot of the things that we see written, which is all unfortunate, actually, because if you're going to do science right, you can't do it as a matter of fear. You have to take the steps properly. Just like a doctor's going to try to cure a patient, you got to go through the right steps. You don't go through, oh my goodness, I have to hurry this or something. Yeah, the politics, when it started in the United Nations, and the last chapter of my book, I get through some of this, about how Maurice Strong was there, and he wanted to turn the United Nations into a global government. So when an idea came along about, from some scientists in Sweden quite a few years ago, and they say, well, hey, maybe our carbon dioxide can cause global warming. They weren't sure, but Strong got this one, and he said to himself and others, this is what he was looking for. Something that would be a global problem that only a global government could solve. And therefore, let's make this part of the United Nations. And there were several steps along the way, and one of them was the IPCC, all of which he got going. And so the intention of the United Nations promotion was power to begin with. And to achieve that power, they actually blocked any criticisms of this early theory. Where if it were normal science, that theory would have been published someplace and other scientists look at it and figure out, and pretty soon it would have been torn apart right away, okay, many years ago. But in order to get it going, Strong made sure he protected this idea, and he built it up in the United Nations. And then it turns out our president, G.H.W. Bush, several years ago, Bush 1, he's the one that really started it in the United States, because he went to the United Nations event and publicized it, and he made it a part of the US agenda. And I think that was the beginning, essentially, of EPA to start enforcing that. So it's been enforced by government, and then it got into schools. The government itself changed their whole way of doing research contracts. So only the people that would produce what the government wanted would get funded. And there could be no complaints or nothing that might criticize the original theory that they had to uphold. Now, that's not science when you can't do that. Science itself depends upon challenging and proving wrong theories. Okay? And so they totally block that by just saying, hey, all the people in the universities better promote what the government wants, because the government, in fact, controls almost all the research in the universities. And that's a big income for the universities. So it's a powerful thing. So you say, where is it all leading? We can only guess at that. The latest I've read is that, well, it appears to be setting everybody up for the Great Reset, as we call it. The Great Reset does depend upon this climate change theory. It rests upon the laws that are made to stop carbon dioxide worldwide. And they're using those kind of laws to grab their power. For example, let's capture carbon dioxide and stuff it under the ground at great expense, essentially burning government money, stopping criticism of it. I've looked at places where I can try to criticize it. I have friends that are trying to stop it just from the viewpoint. It's silly to do this, but there's so much government money in it now that are paying engineers to solve this problem, as they call it, a problem. Why that? Because the whole claim is that we must reduce our carbon dioxide in order to stop global warming, and we got to do it fast and all that stuff. Okay, so it's this fear of too much carbon dioxide that the government powers, the world powers, are using. And this sort of traps the people. At the same time, by the way, the environmentalists say, well, worldwide, trees are kind of dying. And we know that food may be getting scarce. And we know that carbon dioxide is what trees like to have and plants like to have. It's the source of our food. Why would we ever want to be reducing carbon dioxide? But if the group can make the people believe all this, reduce it, now they got a way to control food. Gives them ways to control other things. And it all comes from the carbon dioxide myth. So, I mean, I can't, that's just my supposition now. I know I'm not doing this from physics, right? You asked me sort of what it is.
Right,
I said,
well,
that's what I see.
And I appreciate your honesty, and I do remember that section of the book. And I think those of us out here on the ground understand what we're up against.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you're on the front lines of this battle because you're being silenced in other ways. I look at opportunities. What can we do? We've heard what you've had to say. How can we help spread this message amongst us? And you said it here too. They start scaring the kids, and our kids are scared. And so I think it's imperative that we start spreading this message to our children too, that we don't have to fear what God has made here. We don't have to fear our environment. And Jim's going to come online. I'm sure you've got some input and questions, Jim, but I have one more point I want to ask you about. So carbon dioxide, CO2, is in fact a greenhouse gas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you made one statement earlier, and I wrote it down. I got big highlight. It says water vapor, humidity is also a greenhouse gas.
Yes.
Okay. So if we are to fear CO2 in its natural environment, the system, a closed system of CO2, regulating itself,
right?
What wouldn't we also want to fear humidity? And are we saying areas of high humidity are because of what? I mean, it's ludicrous when you think of it. Nobody's ever explained to me that water vapor, humidity, is also a greenhouse gas.
Okay.
It's like we're I don't know. It's just ludicrous.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for that. That's just incredible. What a stunning revelation.
Yeah, and you're correct that it is ludicrous in that sense. That if you really want to cool the planet, then you have to worry more about water vapor than carbon dioxide, actually.
Amazing.
So, yeah. By the way, I'll mention just one other thing.
Jim,
we have people.
Go ahead.
We have people like Bill Gates and other multi-billionaires who totally believe this thing about carbon dioxide making our planet too hot. So now they want to put stuff in the upper atmosphere to reflect the sunlight to cool the earth. Now, that is crazy. Way back when I was even in charge of doing weather modification things for the National Science Foundation, there was one principle. Don't modify anything unless you can predict an effect, okay? You have no ethical right to modify anything out there. First, you got to make sure that your predictions are good enough to know what's going to happen. And in this case, if they put stuff up in the upper atmosphere that won't easily come away and it stays there, we're in trouble. It will change the balance of the heat of the earth. And going by a theory that's totally wrong is really bad. I mean, people like Gates have no time to look at the truth, right? He's just preaching the gospel. So that's another danger.
That's incredible. Jim, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, actually, it's been a benefit that Ed's video wasn't up because I've been able to just sit back and soak in what you've said, Ed. And I've heard you speak on 2 other occasions, and I've read your book, so it was a great refresh. What I'm more curious about is your colleagues. If I think back to a story that I was told by Dr. Annie here locally, she had mentioned, pre-COVID shutdowns, she sat down with her esteemed doctor colleagues and discussed what they were going to do about COVID. And everybody in the room said, well, it's just another cold. Let's treat it like a cold. But then, of course, as you know, the government got involved and the agenda got involved, and Annie was ousted from her esteemed Logan Hospital colleagues, fighting the fight by herself.
Yeah.
And today been on the bow hunting training online, and there's a section that talks about ethics and the things that we do when nobody's looking and how we treat these things. And I'm just wondering about the ethics and your colleagues, where they're at on this, because you seem to be one of the very, very few waving this flag. And I have no doubt in my mind that what you're talking about is accurate and researched to the degree that I'm satisfied with. But where are your colleagues and their ethics?
Mm.
You say, where are my colleagues?
Your colleagues in this industry of science. Where
Oh.
are they on this, and where are their ethics to beat the same drum that you are?
In what I'll call my area, being the group of scientists that are saying the IPCC is wrong. I'm sure we're less than 10% of all the scientists in the world that are chiming in on this thing. But we're the guys that are correct. But even within our group, there's a division. Okay, talk about divisions in politics. But in this particular case, I'm a subset, and I've got at least 150, 200 other scientists that strongly support what I'm doing, and I'm supporting them. We all agree because I've looked at this carefully, and that's the theory one. Not everybody on my side understands what we're doing on the theory one, even though I can explain it pretty easily, and it's not very complicated. And so we have a little bit of division, but in general, we're not thinking about that part. We've got a good 1,000 scientists on my side that will tell you the same thing I'm saying, and they have good reasons for it. People are coming from all different angles that our carbon dioxide is not causing any of this climate change. We'll all come down to that and agree with it.
Well, I will thank you for your time and being here tonight. I know Rod keeps an eye on the clock, and just keep doing what you're doing, because I think, as it relates to our group, information is critical in the success of our candidates and winning. This gives us more ammunition to fight back against things like the Green New Deal and electric vehicles and the false narratives that they're all fighting at different levels, depending on where they're at across the country or even here in Montana. So thank you for your work. Thank you for giving us the time tonight. And I look forward to seeing you around town some more. And Rod, I'll let you close us up, but just very appreciative.
Well, thank you very much.
Dr. Berry, I'm going to echo what Jim just said. And I know that you're a professional. And so if you have to stand alone, you're okay standing alone. I get that. But
Yeah.
know this, you may be alone or one of few when it comes to colleagues, but you are not alone when it comes to the layperson out here who reads your book, who has heard your public comments on this and has watched you teach this. And we will continue to promote your book, promote the science, and promote this even on our website. So what you're doing is not in vain. It is appreciated, and keep up the good fight. I want to thank you again, and I will ask you back. Maybe we'll get you in for another video session down the road here, maybe after the election or before the next one. And really get this message out there. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Do you have any final thoughts for us, Ed?
In the next few weeks, I'm undertaking perhaps a project that might be too big for me, but I'm going to try it. I see the Republicans are having a hard time getting elected. The Democrats have more money, et cetera. But one of the things where the Republicans are failing, in my view, is that they are not countering the Democrats' promotion of climate change. The Republicans are basically silent. So I'm going to try to do that message for them And I'm going to be getting out and speaking as much as I can and writing as much as I can, basically to clarify that this Democrat climate change thing is a fraud. And hopefully it might help get a few Republicans elected. That's my game for the next 2 months.
Excellent. And we're with you on that. Dr. Berry, again, I'm going to wrap this up. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your research. I thank you for the effort you've put into your career and for the fight ahead of us for the next 2 months and beyond. Thank you.
Well,
again.
glad.
Thank
I'm
everybody
happy
for
that
joining
you're all aboard. That's great.
us. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.